Hey guys, this is our second video on complex sentences. So we talked about in the first video that every complex sentence by definition is going to have an independent clause and plus one or more dependent clauses. Okay? So let's talk about the new kind of dependent clause that you could have. Okay, so in the second complex sentence, the new kind of dependent clause you could have is the adjective clause. How exciting. This is how you will recognize adjective clauses. And there's an easy way, and it's just like the other dependent clause that we did, which was the adverb clause. But the adjective clauses will meet these three requirements. First, it will begin with a relative pronoun. Okay, and your list of relative pronouns are here. You have who, whom, whose, that, or which. And that's the W-H-I-C-H, not the other spelling, which would have a pointy hat. Make sure you know the difference. But it would begin with a relative pronoun, so this would be your clue word. Then, next, it will contain a subject and a verb, because we all know that by definition, if it's a clause, it has to have a subject and a predicate, or a subject and a verb. And then finally, the adjective clause will function as an adjective, how about that, after the noun it is describing. And it will explain or answer the question, what kind, how many, or which one. It'll act just like an adjective, but it's the whole group of words that's acting just like an adjective. Okay? It will also follow one of these patterns. So it'll look like this. You'll have your relative pronoun, which is your clue word. You'll have your subject, and then you'll have the verb in that order. It has to be like that. So if you see a relative pronoun, look for a subject and verb to go with it, and voila, you have adjective clause. The other way it could be is that the relative pronoun is the subject, or it acts as the subject, and then you have a verb to go with it. So that one's a little trickier. However, you will get used to what they look like. Okay, let's keep going. Here are some examples. Okay, here is an adjective clause, just an adjective clause by itself. It's not in a sentence, so don't think anything like that. It's just the adjective clause itself. The clue word or relative pronoun is, you guessed it, whose, and then the subject would be I's, and the verb is pleaded. So you have your pattern. If we scroll back up, and it'll stay, you have your relative pronoun, subject plus a verb. That's what you have here. Relative pronoun, subject, verb. Okay, let's look at another one. All right. That bounced across the kitchen floor. This is another adjective clause. In this one, that is the relative pronoun functioning as the subject. You don't have anything else that's acting as a subject. That it can act as the subject of this clause. And then the verb would be bounced. Okay, the next one is with the word who, who hiccuped for 7 hours afterwards. Again, who is your relative pronoun acting like the subject of this clause. And then hiccuped is the verb or the action. So who hiccuped is your subject-verb combination. And because, if you look at these, none of these three, the who hiccuped, that bounced, whose big brown eyes, none of those could be a sentence by itself. Therefore, they are all dependent clauses, more specifically adjective clauses. Okay, let's look at some full sentences, what a complex sentence with an adjective clause looks like, and look at the placement especially. All right, in this first sentence, we've taken the adjective clause we've already looked at and put it with an independent clause. Diane felt manipulated by her beagle Santana. That is the independent clause. And then, whose big brown eyes pleaded for another cookie. Remember, it's an adjective clause, so this adjective clause is describing Santana, the beagle. Don't forget you have eyes as a subject, pleaded as a verb. So that should throw up your antenna saying, okay, I've got another subject-verb combination, so I know I have more than a simple sentence. This is complex. Independent clause, dependent clause. Okay, looking at the next one. Growling ferociously. Let's just pause right there for a moment. You should know what that is. What is it? It is a participial phrase. The ing, that should be your clue right there. This is a participial phrase, and the independent clause begins here. Oreo and Skeeter, Madison's two dogs, competed for the hard-boiled egg. All of that is your independent clause. Okay? If we break it down a little bit more, by the way, what is this? You should know what that is as well. Got a guess? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's an appositive describing Oreo and Skeeter. Okay, so back to this is the independent clause. Now, remember, here's your clue word, that, and here's the verb that goes with it, because that can be the subject of this clause. That is the subject, bounce is the verb, and this is a dependent clause that describes the word egg. Okay, which egg? The egg that bounced across the kitchen floor. Okay, so when you see that you have a subject verb, and let's do this. Here's your subject verb combination for your independent clause, but then you have to notice that you've got, not that much, you've got a subject verb combination here. So when you have more, good grief, hold on. Who calls in the middle of a vodcast? Don't they know that this is important stuff? Anyway, okay. So the multiple subject verb combinations, that should clue you into the fact that it's more than a simple sentence. This is a complex sentence. Okay, here you go. One more example. Laughter erupted from Anna Marie is your independent clause. The subject would be laughter is the subject and erupted is the verb. You've got who hiccuped for 7 hours as your adjective clause. And remember, your adjective clause is going to come after the noun it describes. If I scroll back up, you can see that in your other examples. That bounced across the kitchen floor describes X. Whose big brown eyes pleaded for another cookie describes Santana. It has to come after. Do not begin a sentence with an adjective clause. You can't. It has to come after the noun that you are describing. Okay? So let's talk about punctuating the adjective clause correctly. You have to decide if it's essential or non-essential to the sentence. If it's essential, if it needs to be in the sentence, then you are not using commas. Okay? Anytime you have an adjective clause that begins with the word that, no commas are needed with that as an adjective clause, beginning an adjective clause. Okay, so look at the sentence. The vegetables that people leave uneaten are often the most nutritious. No commas. You don't need them. Okay, now for your others, most of the time you will need the commas. Okay, you have to decide, does it read better with the commas or without? Now you don't get that option with that. What does it say? Read it with me. No commas are needed when that begins the adjective clause. But with the other ones, there's a little leeway, but just, use your own judgment and see if it reads better with or without the commas. So here, broccoli, which people often leave uneaten, is very nutritious. So it almost begs or requires the commas. Okay, let's look at one last thing, and that is the difference between adjective clauses and appositive phrases. Now, the difference should be obvious. If you have a clause, you have to have a subject and a verb. If you have a phrase, you will not have those. So look at this example of your appositive. Austin, the boy in the front row, completed his work. This is a phrase. There is no verb to be found. Okay, if I take it out, Austin completed his work. Now it's obvious that this is the subject and predicate that makes the independent clause. Okay, so by putting it back, this is just a phrase to describe Austin. Now, look at the difference. This is an adjective clause. Number one, it begins with the relative pronoun. That is the subject of the clause. Is sitting is your verb in the front row. Okay, so you have a subject and a verb to describe Austin. Here you do not. That's the difference. Okay, let's look at how to incorporate an adjective clause. Here you have just a simple sentence. The shirt is ugly. And you can add in an adjective clause beginning with the relative pronoun. There you go. That has brown polka dots is the adjective clause. That would be your relative pronoun that acts as the subject, and has would be the verb. So now you've got your dependent clause is here, and that's your independent clause. Okay? So independent clause plus a dependent clause equals complex sentence. Okay, study, study.